That's right. Thank you. And I want to be really clear about this presentation tonight. Bonnie and Angie are both co-presenters here in a way, and when we've rehearsed and everything, I want them, they're going to be coming in and out. Angie's going to be saying, oh, we have a question or a comment. She's going to be reading that. Bonnie's timing. So thank heavens it isn't just me talking, and we will be breaking into small groups too for some discussion. So, and I don't know, some of you have done a lot of the sessions. Some of you, maybe this is your first one, but I really want to read to you first a quick statement that our state president, Linnell Hout, wrote concerning all of the, I'm going to say, sadness that is happening in our country right now. Sad is how it makes me feel, but I want to read her statement and acknowledge that we are all concerned about what's going on. So she says, let us who are here together in common fellowship to make democracy work for everyone, take some time to recognize the despair and oppression of many of our fellows. It isn't just one thing that is troubling, it is many things. The advantage of the League is that we work in so many areas: democracy, healthcare, equity, income, education, and much more. That there is a place for you to go from, it is too much, it is overwhelming, to, I can do one thing and be joined by others who share my concern and energy. With some of the issues, we will not and should not be in the lead. With others, we will be. I want you to know that state board members are reaching out to leaders in organizations whose main mission it is to end racism, to see what would be best for the League of Women Voters of Washington to do. We will keep you informed of what develops, and also know we are working in many areas. We have important work to do, both immediate and long-term. So that's a nice statement and acknowledgement of what's happening right now. And the thing I admire about the League and everybody that I know who is in it is that we just keep going forward, and we have to start working now on actions that we can take, and we're doing that. So, okay, let's start this. So the title of this is "This Meeting is Too Long," and talk about meetings that run too long and talk about difficult people in meetings. So if you would just take a minute to kind of go internally and think about a meeting that you've been in that you walked out and thought, gee, I hope I never have to do that again. Or a meeting you walked out of and said, that was really a good meeting. And it was well run, and it was a good meeting. And just kind of internally think about that for a minute, and think about, you know, what you really want to get out of this session today. Because we're here for all different reasons. So if somebody wants to just type in a few problems that they've seen, type it in real quick to Angie, and then she'll read some of them out, just so we can kind of all start in the same place. And then we'll just take, you know, 3 or 4 statements from people. Don't be afraid to type.
One thing I can say is common is people who derail the meeting and it goes way off track. That's no fun. Mm-hmm. Another comment we have is naysayers in the group. Meetings that seem totally unnecessary. That's one of my favorite statements. This meeting could have been an email. Another statement is, find we need a balance of efficient meetings and allowing social time. That's a really good point. Mm-hmm. People co-opting the conversation, getting off subject without insulting, or how do you deal with people getting off subject without insulting anyone? Overbearing larger than life participants, developing agenda with enough detail but not too much. These are all really great comments.
Okay, good, good. So yeah, we've all been in all of those types of meetings, I think. So we could do the next slide. And what I can say first is the most important thing you can do is plan ahead, prevention. Your agenda is your prevention from a lot of problems. And sometimes I've had the experience where I was putting an agenda together and then it occurred to me, we can do this with an email. Because what it does is it forces you to be very clear about what you want to do and what needs to be done. So you send out ahead of time before the meeting, you send this agenda out. It's timed and everyone who's on that agenda knows their name is right there. This is what you're going to talk about and you have 10 minutes. And you send that out ahead of time so that people can get back to you if that's unacceptable to them. They might want to add something else to it. It will prevent a lot of problems. So next slide, Bonnie. So this is an example. It's more detailed usually, but this is just an example of a board meeting that we might have out here. And I'll send this out ahead of time. It's going to start at 4:30 and it's going to end at 6:15, no matter what. And everybody gets this at least a week ahead of time. And so Mickey's our treasurer. And so I'm saying, Mickey, you got 10 minutes for your report. And it's a week ahead of time. So Mickey can come back to me, email and say, that's not enough time. I have to discuss whatever, or fine, I'm not even going to need that much time. If she needs more time, then we redo the agenda and I know ahead of time so that we don't all of a sudden have a long treasurer's report that nobody was ready for. Same thing with these. You can see people's names beside who's responsible for what. That goes out ahead of time so everybody knows what the expectations are and the topics, what will be discussed. Next one, please. So this is an example of a more looser meeting. Board meetings generally are pretty standard in terms of what you need to do, but if you're chairing a centennial committee and you're starting from scratch, it's like your first committee. Sometimes those meetings can be the hardest to get through because it isn't as structured and it shouldn't be as structured, but you can still plan ahead. So you, as the person who will be facilitating, you think about, well, what do we need to do? We need to introduce and share goals, and we can spend about, we're going to start at 4 and we're going to be at 6 and we're going to leave at 6. So you think about what you need to do during that time. There's no assignment of people because you're basically facilitating, but you send this out ahead of time. And then you find out there's somebody on the committee that wants to talk about something or has a report on something that they want to turn in. Well, you know that a week ahead of time so you can adjust. So your agenda is your friend and savior in many places. And it's the best thing that you can do. You do it for yourself because you need to be really clear when you're facilitating what your goal is. And everybody else needs to be clear. And everybody agrees to it. You start the meeting with saying, is this okay? Is this okay with everybody? Everybody's had a chance to have input and we all agree to this timeline. So that's a good prevention. It doesn't matter what kind of a meeting you're doing. Okay, next slide. So disruptive behavior, and we named some of them. Disruptive behavior is kind of on a continuum. It can be a whole variety of things, from somebody continually whispering to somebody else, or somebody dominating the meeting, or somebody getting angry and really trying to take over the meeting. So we're not going to a group yet, are we, Bonnie? No. I've got to check my cheat sheet. Okay. All right. So next slide, please. So dealing with difficult people, the first thing we have to figure out is, what do they want? What is going on for them that is allowing this behavior to happen? Some people want control, power, to be understood, to be heard. And some people just can't help themselves It's just the way they communicate. And they tend to get on a topic and just keep talking. And those are almost the most difficult to deal with because they don't want anything particularly. It's just their style as a human communicator. And you certainly want to be sure that you treat all of them with respect, but yet you can't let it go on. And I think one of the comments was, how do you go on from something like that? So next slide. So this material, the next couple of slides, is from training that I got from Stephen Glenn. One of the books, the one that this is from Developing Capable People. And he and another person, he's the main author, they designed a lot of training for parents and for teachers in communicating with children. And when I was taking the classes in this, I thought, I had a teenage son at home at the time. And for those of you who have ever been around teenagers, which I'm sure most of you have, it can be a really stressful time in your house. And all of a sudden I was hit with the idea that, gee, I wonder if this would work at home. And what I found out through, this has been many years ago, through my life, is that the words and the ideas that I'm going to talk about today work with any human being in your life. Human beings have the same needs. So Stephen Glenn presents words that are builders and words that are blockers. So blockers, you're assuming, you're rescuing, you're directing, you're expecting, you're controlling. Builders in a conversation, you're checking, you're exploring, encouraging, inviting, and sharing. So next slide, please. So this is basically it's a little more information for you before you start processing it on your own. So when you're assuming something, this is what certainly I was guilty of with my son, and I think a lot of parents can be, but I knew him better than anybody on earth, and I knew what he was thinking and how he felt. And instead of sort of summarizing and asking him about what he believed, checking, I would do the other. So directing is when you're explaining what's wrong and issuing orders. Instead of exploring, help me understand. These are some words you can use to evoke a different conversation. So expecting, you're demanding an outcome. Inviting, what's the final goal? What do we want here? What do we all want? And then controlling, this is what you're going to do. This is what we need to do. And instead of sharing this could be an option of solving this problem that we have. So what we want to do now is we're going to break into small groups. This is a lot of information, and it seems on the surface, it seems basic, but it's very hard. It's very hard to do. It comes naturally to some people. And I have to say, it didn't come naturally to me. I had to practice, and we're going to be doing some practices as well. But we're going to break into groups. Bonnie, do you want to explain the groups?
We're going to put you in groups. What's going to happen is there will be probably about 6 of you in a group, and you'll go into the groups once I push the button. And I think you have to accept the room you're in. You'll stay in that room for about 7 minutes. And when you're in the room, you're going to discuss with those 6 people about blockers and builders and maybe practice. The thing that happens is when we go there, you're not going to be able to see this screen anymore. So while we're getting you into rooms, you might want to jot down a couple of those key phrases if that would help you. And I'll be able to put something on the screen, but it'll only show for a few minutes and it'll be gone. So you might just want to take a minute to do that while I get you ready to go into your breakout room. So Linda, while I'm getting the rooms ready, if you have anything else to add, you sure can.
Yeah, some of you may have gone ahead and pre-printed the handout. And so if you did, you'll have the handout in front of you. Hopefully there's at least one person in the group that did that.
Linda, did you want to see if anybody has any questions
Sure.
at this point?
Sure.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, or you can just raise your hand and I will call on you.
Oh, wow. We have somebody here. I've just read one of them. I thought this was sounding familiar. I too was a developing capable people trainer. I am one of the authors of the Positive Discipline books. Oh, wow. Rosalind Duffy, Seattle King County. Wow, we need to get together, Rosalind. Thank you for sharing that. Please butt in anytime. I don't mean butt in, I mean share.
There you go.
So we're ready to move people to rooms if they're ready to go.
I think we are. Are we, Angie?
Okay.
I think we're ready. Let's do it.
Okay.
So we'll see you back in the main room in about 7 minutes.
All right.
Okay. So are there any questions or comments that are typed in the chat box that we need to take a minute to deal with?
Well, there's one statement saying that we're doing exactly what they were missing in other meetings in this one by going into breakout rooms. So that's really nice.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. I mostly just see responses to your first question, which is very good. So
Okay.
I think you can keep moving on.
Okay. All right. So next slide. So we've done some talking about how do you interrupt somebody in a polite way. And we did the slide with what do they want, didn't we? Okay, we did. All right. So what people want is they want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want to be respected. So those are your three key things to keep in mind. And this might seem a little stilted, but it helps if you practice it this way. And everybody knows about paraphrasing, and sometimes people will just say back the same words that you've said, and they think that's a paraphrase. You said, and then they'll say exactly the same words. A paraphrase is you putting what they said in your own words. And again, we talked about a continuum of behavior. And so if you have someone who is really, really upset and really angry, one of the most powerful things you could do for another human being is acknowledge their feelings. And you might feel uncomfortable telling someone how they feel, but that's not really the way it comes off. I want to just give you an example here of a situation, and I'll read it through because we're gonna have some time to think about this and practice this a little bit. So if you have that person in the meeting who is getting excited and that you can't get them off the topic, they just keep taking up time, repeating themselves or whatever it is, or they may get off the topic completely. Sometimes people like that will do associative thinking, and so they'll get off on another topic. So you can say something like, you're really feeling passionate about getting more volunteers on this committee because we're all getting burned out. And this is important because of burnout. And you want to find some way to get more people to participate. If we go back to the agenda and look at our time frame, we allowed 10 minutes for this, whatever it happens to be on the agenda. Or if it's not on the agenda, you can say, this was not an agenda item that we had prepared for. So this is what we might do. We might have a subcommittee to discuss this. And then we'll save more time next time. So you offer a solution. So your goal with this is to move that person from the existing state that they're in move forward to another place. And the way you do that is letting them know that they were heard, understood, and respected. And so this is kind of a formal way that you can practice that. You're not always going to be using the same words, but it's a formal disciplinary thing to practice it. And I want to say something about two of the most important words in our language before we go on. And but. And those are the two most important words in our language that we have. I'm going to say two sentences to you, and I want you to think about how those landed the same or different on you after I said it. All right, I'm going to say, that's a good point, but we need to make phone calls. Now I'm going to say, that's a good point, and we need to make phone calls. Does that feel different? It sometimes changing that one word in a sentence. Because many times when we say but, then the assumption is that what you're going to say after that is more important than what the person just said, no matter how nice you are about what they said. So it's another thing to practice when you're doing your paraphrasing, or when you're doing summarizing of things. Summaries are really important. And that's really what a paraphrase can be. It is partially a summary as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you some more time here. And this time is, I mean, certainly you can react and talk about, you know, and ask questions, but if you can think of a situation and actually practice saying these words. And okay, we're going to do that. Okay, so practice saying these words. Bonnie, how much time will we have for this?
We had down that we thought about having about 9 minutes. How does that sound to you?
Okay, that's fine.
And again, I'm going to put you'll be back in your same breakout room, I think, with the same people you had before. Again, you might just want to jot down those phrases. I can flash it onto your screen, but if you want to take a minute just to jot down those few little sentence starters so that you can practice. And remember to try to start it with what the situation is and then practice what you would say.
Are you getting any? We want to do messages, so.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Susan, you were making a really great point before we jumped back into this whole meeting. Do you want to finish that statement you were making for the group?
Oh, well, we just found out about the whiteboard option in Zoom. We were just trying to find a way to write stuff down so people know they've been heard. And I said, well, in Zoom meetings, there's no way to use a flip chart. Well, it turns out Jean knew there's this thing called whiteboard that you can use and save. It's fabulous.
That's true. That's true.
Oh, that's great. And I just learned something too. We have two Susans with really great ideas. Susan Griggs, do you want to finish the other idea that you were talking about?
Yes, thank you, Angie. One of the things that occurred to me is that it's important that we realize that people from other racial and ethnic backgrounds can get very insulted that time is more important than relationships and personal interactions. And so it's really important to be able to communicate that you hear them and that the time is not more important. And, you know, we're at a very difficult position because we don't have unlimited time and we have an agenda. But on the other hand, if we're going to alienate somebody, that's going to really cause a lot more problems with our agendas in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angie.
That's
Yeah,
a really good
Susan.
point. Angie, is there another one?
And then we had one more in the chat. Is it better to state that you feel in the form of the I message, or seems rather than to presume how they feel? And we had a good conversation about this when we were practicing. Linda, do you want to chat about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, and it depends on the situation. And you don't have to, this starts out, you feel it sounds very judgmental. You know, like, I know how you feel. So there are many, many different ways to acknowledge someone's feelings without using that phrase. So it's a tricky one. It's easy when you're dealing with children, but when you're dealing with adults in dynamic situations, you don't necessarily want to, it's like pointing the finger at somebody and saying, you feel angry, you know, and that can be totally inappropriate. But there's a way that you can bring feelings into the meeting or the conversation that acknowledges the elephant in the room. You know, we all feel, you know, you could say we all feel, or this makes me feel, or I'm sensing that. So there's a lot of different ways to say that. You don't necessarily just say you feel and then identify it. Sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it depends on the people. We've got Patty Santangelo with her hand up if she's got a question.
One of the tools that we've started using is called a parking lot. We hand out little Post-its at the beginning of the meeting. And if you want to talk about something that's not on the agenda, you write it on your Post-it and we come back to parking lot items at the end.
That's a good strategy. And you've got everybody agreeing to that ahead of time.
Yes.
Yes, that's a good strategy.
And if somebody does go off, you can tell them, put it in your parking lot.
Yeah. We've got one last question in the chat, which is, holding meetings with members who are working and those who are retired brings out the differences in how they view their time. Save the chit chat for the end of the meeting.
Right. Yeah. Our board meetings here in Clallam, it just seems overwhelming sometimes that we have so many decisions we have to make and so many things. And we have a fairly large board at this point. And so I threw it out to everybody. Do you want, you know, how do you want to do it? Do you want to extend our time? Because we've always had the timed agendas. And I threw it out to them and said, we can go an extra 15 minutes or a half an hour. We can meet earlier. I mean, we decide on that, you know, how we want to do it. And I kind of polled the board and not one person wanted to go past the time. So then, you know, they knew, and it's everybody's responsibility to, so when I do the agenda, I make it fit in that time frame. And if there's actually more than that, then we figure it out how we can deal with it in a different way. But that's your power of that agenda, because everybody has to think through it and everybody agrees to it. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, was there another one?
So Linda, just want to let you know. Oh, I just wanted to let you know that it is 7:18.
Okay, good. My clock says 7:19, so we're going to be wrapping this up. We are committed. This meeting will end at 7:30, I promise. We have an agenda. So basically the message is, you summarize, you paraphrase, check and explore. Use and instead of but. Phrases, let me make sure I understand. It sounds like you want. Help me understand what you mean by. Sometimes that's a good one. I had a supervisor say that to me one time, because I was all excited about some project I wanted to do. And she was sitting there with her eyes rolling around in her head trying to follow me. And she said, help me understand what you mean by, and then she said the word. And it helped me focus. It was a really powerful thing to do. And then, you know, if you're at a meeting, sometimes meetings will go on and on because everybody's agreeing and they want to tell you why they're agreeing. What's important about that? Why we're all agreeing. It's good, you know, and it's a good discussion, but we're out of time. So you can interrupt and you could say, it seems like we have consensus. So, and then whatever is appropriate for moving on, and you've moved the group on. Or we don't have consensus. Sometimes you just can't get it in a meeting. So then what are your options? It seems like we don't have consensus. Look at the time on our agenda so we could do more study, you know, and you can throw it out to them. What options do we have here? Because we have to stay within our timeline for our meeting. So basically, in summary, then we'll have time for a few questions, but next slide. So in summary, the basic message is prevention is your best friend. You know, plan ahead, have it timed, and everybody agrees on it. And just keep in mind, every human needs to be heard, understood, and respected. And words do matter. You know, find a friend. Normally I'll do this, it's a 3-hour session with more information than this. This is kind of a smattering of the important points and a lot of practice because it's harder than it seems. But the agenda is your best friend, and you could blame the agenda for a lot of things when you want to move on. So we've got a few minutes for some questions if anybody wants to type them in or raise your hand.
Yeah, I'd encourage folks to raise their hand and ask their question directly. There's a couple little loose things I wanted to tie up before we jump into there. One of the questions in the chat that came in right as we were wrapping up the last session was, do some of these techniques work better in meetings of 5 or more? Meeting with only 2 other people, I think these approaches might be stilted.
It depends on the situation. I think there's probably some of you out there. I'm sorry, my throat is, I've got allergies. I hope my throat isn't too weird. In conflict resolution, a strategy that people use for 2 people is, you know, you have to paraphrase what the other person said before we can go on. So I think it depends on the situation. Sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it isn't, but I think it can be used with just 2 people.
Another question was, well, it's more of a statement question. Linda in our group had a funny story. The mom suggested ringing a bell when someone interrupted, and the mom was the interrupter. We also suggested a neutral timer to limit time, like a dog barks or a parrot speaking.
Yeah, and actually I should have mentioned that. It's very good, especially if you're the facilitator and you're not so good with time yourself. I mean, this is why I've got Bonnie and Angie here. Bonnie's our timer. And so at the beginning of a meeting, you can say, okay, here's the agenda. Is anybody willing to be the timer? And then it's somebody else's responsibility. So when you're facilitating, you don't have to worry about that. It's a good idea. Bonnie, I'm thinking if we take the PowerPoint down, everybody can go to gallery. And then we've got some, Catherine Murphy has her hand raised, I think.
There you go. Yep, that was the next.
So everybody can go to gallery view.
So one of the questions that I have is sort of a comment and a question. So as you're having the meetings to get the agreements to happen, so you're forming sessions, those sessions probably have to have more unprogrammed time. You might expand the time limits. And I guess the other question that I had was on big projects, like over long periods of time, I always assume that you're going to have one major disaster and 3 minor ones. And so how do you adjust timing to have, you know, to have that adjusting back and forth in real time dynamically?
When you're right, excuse me, when you're right in the meeting, you mean? Well, I think anytime that you're dealing with creative adults, which we all are, right? You have to say, I mean, you have to be flexible. It's like those of you who are teachers, you know that you have a lesson plan and here's the goals, here's the objectives, here's the activities, and you have that. And the reason you have that is so you can be flexible because sometimes it's just not going to work. And so I think the planning ahead is, again, the key to that. And if everybody in the meeting or the planning session or whatever it happens to be agrees to make the adjustment, sometimes that's what happens. You have to stay flexible. Right. Good point.
There was also a statement made earlier in the chat queue that I thought was really valuable. Sometimes you need to figure out what people need as well as what they want. And I thought that was important to bring up.
Mm-hmm. And a good way to get to that is the phrase, help me understand, you know, what it is you're saying, or, you know, a word they're using, or help me understand what you're needing. That's okay. You know, it's
Mhm.
it's validating.
So I have a technical question because I put a question in chat, but it hasn't been, I don't know that you're seeing it. And it's just simple. Where is whiteboard? Where do I find that?
Oh, Bonnie or Angie, do you know that?
Catherine Murphy, you know everything.
If you go to share
Whiteboard.
screen, if you go
Yeah,
to share
it's
screen,
under the share screen section.
yeah, you
Yeah.
go to share screen, it's an option.
And I don't think participants can share the, oh, I can. Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah, so it's under share screen.
okay. Thank you. That looks handy.
And
Yeah,
can I didn't see that. I didn't see that question. So hop in if you have a question that we're not answering.
no,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that in Whiteboard, it works like a text box. So you draw a text box and you can type in there, but be sure to save your whiteboard, and Zoom will automatically save it to a directory that it thinks it's found, probably in your pictures directory on your in your like on your Drive C or in your this PC or whatever it is. That's where it saved mine. So it's very, very helpful when you're having discussions or brainstorming sessions. I used it yesterday on in a brainstorming session with my diversity outreach team.
mm-hmm.
So do you have to have a pen to draw?
No,
You
no,
can type.
You
typing.
just type. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just type in the text box. You can also draw. There's a pen function, as somebody just demonstrated. Yeah, and so you can draw. And if you're really good at moving the mouse, you can write with that. I'm not so good at that. And I'm also not a great typist, but at least, you know, it's there and it'll wrap the text and it'll move things around and all that kind of thing. It will also overlay text on top of text. Also, anybody in your meeting can add to the whiteboard. And, you know, I ask them to be sure and use a different color so that I know what kind of blithering I did in the meeting. But anyway, yeah, it's a pretty cool function.
I need to ask, I made a comment on the chat in the beginning and it never came up. So I don't know what happened to it.
Okay, what, just tell us.
I don't know. I'll have to look and see if it's
Okay.
still there.
Okay. There's nothing more validating than having what you're saying written down. You know,
Well, I
we do
did
that
write
with,
it in and I just
do-
wonder, I don't see it now, whether it's just gone away or what. That's my question. Sometimes the meetings have said you're supposed to be directing it to so-and-so, and then I don't know how to do that yet. And so I would chat, but I don't know what happened to the chat that I actually put in there for this meeting.
If you look at the bottom of the chat file, there's an icon that says file, and that will save the chat.
Oh,
and then when you go into your computer, you have to do a find.
Right.
Because Zoom puts it just wherever it wants to.
Yeah,
You can never find
well,
it.
it tells you can do it to OneDrive, a Google Drive, or your computer.
I have seen it listed above, and because usually I've just been pushing the enter button after I put it in, and
Right.
it went to the feed up above. And so that's my question. I don't see it at all now. So.
Yeah. Well, at the bottom of the chat, there's a file button, and then it asks you where you want it to put it.
Okay.
No, that's a little bit
Yes.
different, actually.
That's if you
Actually-
want to save it to your computer, but
Yeah.
she's just asking if
Oh.
why she can't see her. You can't
Yeah.
see your
And
writing because we're not part of the chat. Only the presenters are today.
Okay.
No, you should be
Yeah.
able to see anything that you wrote. If you open the chat window, like I have a message here from me to Angie, and the message I wrote is there, and Angie's reply is there. But
Okay.
sometimes chat just doesn't work.
Okay, and what I'm going to do is interrupt right now because it's 7:30.
Yeah.
And let you know that there are some training some training things. Amy, are you still on? I don't know if
I am, yes,
Okay.
I'm here.
Are there things posted that would help people with this on the website?
Yes, there should be. And also we kind of covered the how to do the chatting thing at the beginning, you know, the pull down menu to choose who to direct it to. One thing that I don't think is mentioned in any of the instructions that might be useful is that any chat that happens in a breakout group does not go outside of that breakout group. And so that's an easy way to lose some chats. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There's a ton of Zoom training on the league website, and that it is linked in every email you get in the morning about council.
Yeah. So that was the reason why this was a very stressful council to plan and execute, because it's a whole different thing. I appreciate those of you who tuned in, all of you. It's late, it's dinner time, and I'm sure you've all had a long day. So please email me if you have other questions and you want to continue the conversation. And I want to thank Bonnie and Angie for helping me. And you all have a good rest of the evening.